correct me here. I've been wondering this for the last day as I was.
Yeah, you got it. You got it. Vetri, the first one.
Sal Vetri. All right. It has a better ring to it, anyways. I hope we are going live here right now. We just had a few technical sound difficulties. I am, of course, Noah Kelly, filling in for Chris Randone, who is off on some sort of meditation wellness spa retreat, I think. I don't know, something like that. That sounds plausible, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. It sounds interesting.
Right? Yeah, he's doing yoga right now and getting in touch with his chi.
I like it.
What are we saying for this slate, man? First off, is this our first show, second show together?
I think it's our second show. I think we did a Saturday show earlier in the NFL season, probably like the first month or so.
Right. Yeah, it's been a while, man. This season is coming to an end pretty quickly. So what we're going to do today, I think, is we're going to go through just some of the pricing tiers. We're going to talk about, if there's any value on this slate at all. It's a pretty strange slate, if you ask me. And then we're just going to go through each tier, each pricing tier in each position. Talk about what you like and don't like. And then we are going to maybe talk about some stacks and some contrarian options. First, just want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Yahoo. Yahoo Fantasy is killing it right now with their contests. If you haven't been over there, go check it out. They had some massive overlays on Thanksgiving. They have the 200K baller as well this week. And 20K to first in that one. Of course, lower management fees as well. It looks like it still hasn't filled. There's a 6K guaranteed no fee tournament. So no management fees there. It's 5 entry max, $3. You're going to want to go and check that out and make sure that you get in on these contests. Because let me tell you something, it's better paying no rake as opposed to paying a lot of rake, to quote EMAC and his spiel. So, and also now we have Yahoo CSV upload. So you can easily upload all your lineups if you're mass multi-entering. You just got to click on one individual lineup. That will take you to the CSV edit for everything, and then you can just pop it all in there. So, it's great stuff, and I am looking forward to playing another week on Yahoo. All right, should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it, man. I'm excited. 13 games, first time in like 2 months.
I know, right? So, does your strategy change at all when you have these larger slates? Or like I was asking Alex about this a little bit yesterday, and he said the answer generally was like no. But I was wondering like if maybe like game stacks become more viable, and I think there's a slight chance that that's true, or that is like mildly true, I guess, because there's a likelihood that one of these games is going to shoot out, right?
Yeah, definitely. There's more likelihood for that. And I would probably echo that it doesn't change all that much. And it's still slate dependent. Like this one, they just did a really good job pricing it. And we haven't really had much value opening up. Maybe we do some of these running back injuries tomorrow coming out around lock. But yeah, nothing changes all that much outside of ownership is still always relatively important on every single slate, depending on how many games there are. But you'll see it just spread out more, just like on bigger NBA slates, that now you have some of the highest owned guys still in the teens instead of the 30s on a slate like this. So, and also the pricing and it being tighter has to do with that. So I think if anything, yeah, you don't have to worry as much about ownership because there's probably not going to be a 30% guy that you have to take a strong side on as opposed to just some 15% owned players. So that's like the thing that changes the most for me. It's just easier to get to lineups that you feel good about and don't have to be sort of pivoting for ownership's sake.
Well, that's the thing, because this is why this slate is different than I think any slate that we've seen so far this year. And that is that there's no standout ownership. I think the last time I looked on DraftKings and FanDuel, there wasn't anyone we had projected for over 20%. The quarterbacks really spread out. You have like 12 guys between 5 and 10%. So essentially what you have is a situation where like ownership is out the window for the most part, and you just play the best plays or play the top stacks. Like, it's really weird slate. I don't think I can remember anything like this where you had to make a decision on a key guy and whether or not and how you were going to build that lineup around him and whether or not you were going to include like low-owned players or whether you're going to fade them. Like there's no real decisions like that on this slate.
Yeah, DraftKings got and even FanDuel, just the pricing down for like the best time they picked was the first 13 game slate we've had in a couple of weeks. So yeah, I think there's still like, there's lower owned guys in that 5% range and a good amount of them in the wide receiver section that are just going unnoticed. And that's just what's going to happen when you have just 4 to 6 more teams on the slate since there's no bye week. So yeah, ownership doesn't become as much of a priority or a pressing issue. But when it comes to just getting those guys still at like 5% owned, they'll make a difference. So I think it still holds its weight. But yeah, you don't have to worry about the 25 to 30 to 40% owned like Josh Jacobs was week 2.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's get into it a little bit. So I think the first question on everyone's minds this week, or one of the decisions you're going to have to make, is Christian McCaffrey, Dalvin Cook, both, neither, one. Which way are you leaning right now?
Yeah, so I lean to get to McCaffrey here at any point that I can. So the big issue, as we were just saying, is there's not a ton of value. I think some will open up, and it really depends on just how you build your lineups. For myself, and not even out of forcing myself to get there due to liking McCaffrey, but the 5 and 6K wide receiver range, there's just a lot of appealing options. So loading up on those guys, it seems right now is leading to me to get to McCaffrey without really worrying too much about the budget or the bankroll left over. So I prefer McCaffrey on that end. So the news right now on Cook is that he's going to probably play. They said he'll be close to 100%, so definitely banged up. The Detroit Lions, their defensive line over the last 5 weeks is actually number 6 in the league since getting back Mike Daniels. So they have been bad all year until they got back Daniels, and there's been improvement. Still a huge favorite for Cook, so a fine spot for him. But if you're just talking about consistency and upside, and especially in their matchups, I'm going to get to McCaffrey much more than Cook at this price point. Only an $800 difference.
Are you at all worried about the blowout potential in this Lions game?
No, so I would say no. If I did have just shares of Cook or anything, or any lower shares compared to other running backs, it would just be because prioritizing my lineups differently. I'm not too worried about any of the blowout. If you did get them up by, say, 20 points here in this matchup at some point, then yeah, you're probably going to not get as many touches for a banged up Dalvin Cook. But going out there down the stretch, still competing for right now the division and a bye, I think he'll be out there. And I wouldn't expect this thing to get out of hand. The way that the Vikings and the Lions play, they just both play slow. So if anything, the chances of a blowout happening would have to happen really late in this one.
And so Snacks Harrison's back now too, right? Like he was kind of he was out for a couple weeks, wasn't he?
So Daniels was out for like 5 weeks at one point, and Snacks Harrison, he was pretty much not practicing or limited for like a month straight, and now he's back to full participations.
Okay, good. So it looks like he's off the injury report. I was just wondering if maybe that was part of the reason why the Detroit Lions run D has been struggling a little bit of late, giving up a lot of receptions to running backs as well, and receptions and yards. So I'm with you there. Like I'm kind of torn. Like I don't really feel like I have a hot take on one of these two, and it's just going to really come down to lineup construction for me. Not prioritizing them on Osmo.com. We have them as both as an A for points and a B for value, pretty much across the board there. So we'll drop a few rankings and a few ownership projections on this show. Let's get into the next tier of running backs then. Just let me pull up my sheet here. So we got like a bunch of like solid options, I would say, in this range. Derrick Henry priced up for probably the highest price we've seen since he went off couple last year. Nick Chubb, Leonard Fournette, Le'Veon Bell, and Alvin Kamara, just ridiculously cheap. Is he going to be the chalk? Or how do you get away from Alvin Kamara at that price? Is it just like, is it a fade because of San Francisco's defense, or what are you doing with him?
Yeah, where the ownership is right now in him, I feel completely fine with it. I think just relative to the slate, he'll end up being one of the highest owned guys. The lowest price point you've seen him at this year, even dating back to all the way through last year, it's just the lowest price point in a while on this guy. And I have him projected for right around 18 touches. I think that you have the 49ers giving up bottom 3 in the league in both receptions and least receiving yards in the league allowed to running backs. They held down McCaffrey as well in that department. So it's not like it's just been inflated from guys who don't catch the ball. So definitely a tough matchup here. And on the ground, really the number 1 defensive line in the league, it's not a great matchup by any means. It's just the price point. A guy who's in my opinion, good pivot away from him, somewhat lower ownership, would be Le'Veon Bell. But right now there's a lot of murky news around Le'Veon Bell's status here. So we'll have to see.
It looks like he's getting owned too.
Did he come up? I saw that he was like around like 13%.
We have him at 23% on FanDuel.
Okay.
We have him at 15% on DraftKings, and on Yahoo. Let me just look it up. We have him at 21%. So it's not like you're not really getting, if you like Bell, plan, but you're not getting an ownership discount basically.
That makes sense. Yeah. So right now, just straight up, I would have more interest in Bell, but this illness is a big concern, even if he does suit up. So you're in a price range where you're pretty much choosing between Alvin Kamara, Bell, and like Aaron Jones at that point when building your lineup. So where Kamara's ownership comes in right now, I'm fine with it. The matchup is terrible, but it's already built into what the price point is. I know that you have Latavius Murray seeing pretty comparable work on the ground to Kamara right now, but nowhere near the same receiving game role. And you have Kamara, just oddly enough, only one game this year with a touchdown. He had two in that one against, I believe it was Seattle that week. So it's
Oh, sounds like regression.
yeah, exactly. That's why a lot of people are going to be on him. The price point's coming down. It's a fine spot where the ownership is right now. I would not say it's terrible. It's like what 16%. If he was 25-30% on a smaller slate, is probably where you would get him at. So since there's like two more games on the slate, he's going to get his ownership cut in half, which just doesn't seem right.
All right, I was kind of surprised at this stat. How many rushing games above 70 yards does Lev Bell have this year?
I would, off the top of my head, say like two.
0.
Yeah, I know that he had his best game this year was probably against Miami, and that's where he had like a combination of 120 total yards. But yeah, that offensive line has been an issue. He's also not been great, but the offensive line has just been atrocious there.
Yeah, fair enough. What about Derrick Henry in what might be like a pretty solid matchup against the Oakland Raiders? He's had 188, 159, 149 yards, 3 straight games. His upside is just so huge every week that he could break a slate. Are we just like, I know the price point is a little bit too expensive, but for GPPs, I feel like he's viable because his upside is so great.
Yeah, he's viable. And like the biggest decision for me is that 8K range, if I have any interest in it. And then Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb, they look a lot alike now that Kareem Hunt's taking over a lot of the pass catching roles out of Chubb's department. Chubb's still running a lot of routes, but it's a spot that I do prefer slightly Derrick Henry if you're choosing between those two 8K backs. Is a plus 15% run blocking advantage this week. Oakland's 18th against the run this season in rush defense. So the only issue here is he's all the way priced up now. So you're paying for those 100-yard and a touchdown games. Whereas if he goes out there for 93 yards and a touchdown, he's really not getting it there for you at that price tag. So he has been great. He's just now 2 years straight of being really good once it hits this final month of the season. So I think he's fine if people want to get there. I probably just end up not getting to the whole 8K range between just really him and Chubb in general.
I mean, I think that's fair, yeah, and like probably maybe a little bit more viable in half point PPR formats, I guess. But I'm kind of there with you. Like, I guess it's like FOMO with Derrick Henry. Like, I'm just like scared to not play him. Finally, in this range, let's talk about Leonard Fournette. This guy, cash game, is he like cash game lock for people? Has not had less than 12 PPR points all season long. Due for some touchdown regression. Can't remember what the line is in this one, but it's got to be pretty tight. Jacksonville and the Chargers, 26th in fantasy points allowed. Are you getting any Fournette?
Yeah, definitely. So I still want McCaffrey as like cash game running back. Just get him in there and see what you can do from there. But Fournette, it's hard not to like him. He's second in the league right now in opportunities, per game, only behind McCaffrey. We talked about it, me and Luffy, on Thursday. Only 14 less routes run, Luffy pointed out, for Leonard Fournette behind McCaffrey, second in the league. He's just been fantastic. He's averaging 10 targets per game over the past month. Again, Minshew's there, so a change at quarterback. But even with Minshew starting, they were still giving him ample volume, if not more, in the receiving game on a consistent basis. So, yeah, it's a spot where Fournette's just going to get you your 24 touches. The Chargers' defensive line continues to get healthier, and it's definitely not a fantastic matchup for him, but you're just going to get 20-plus touches at 7,800. And on a slate like this, you're pretty much pivoting from probably your Kamaras and your Bells to Fournette. And in GPPs, I actually like doing that.
All right, fair enough. I was just looking, actually, I got to just to digress for a minute. I was looking at the writing up the Falcons a couple of weeks ago and noticed that, like, you know how for the last like 3 years they've been the flow chart team for pass catching running backs, right? They finished last in receptions allowed and yards allowed to opposing running backs. And then for whatever reason, like 4 weeks ago, they were numbered 3 in the league, I think, at limiting opposing backs and limiting opposing yardage. Do you have any idea why? Is that like, and it looks like they've regressed a little bit. Maybe that's because they played like Kamara and Christian McCaffrey. Do you know anything offhand? Like, did they scheme change or anything like that? Like, it looks like they're maybe just starting to regress now because I see that they're kind of middle of the pack.
Yeah, so I don't think it was anything with scheme. I think they're still just as bad, but they didn't face like an actually good pass catching running back until like week 8 when it was David Johnson, and he ended up catching, like, he had his season high in receptions and yardage in that game, like 8 catches or something, 80 yards. So before that, they were facing a lot of like Derrick Henrys. I think Carlos Hyde were like the types of running backs they were facing. So the upside there for like those guys to have a good game in the passing game wasn't there. It's a year where it was odd. They ended up facing Kamara and CMC 4 times in like the last 5 weeks towards the end of the season, which usually skews any team. So I think that's why a lot of their numbers were down. I remember pointing that out earlier in the season, and then it was like David Johnson week, and he got them through the receiving game. So I think it was just a product of not facing guys who catch the ball that much.
All right. Okay, good. I'm glad we got that out of the way. So maybe a little bit higher on McCaffrey this week. Geez in chat says love Gordon a lot this week. I'm assuming that they are referring to Melvin Gordon. Let's get into this next range and lead it off with Melvin Gordon, because I also kind of like Melvin Gordon. The Jags have been torched by opposing running backs recently. Are you buying in here?
Yeah, kind of. And I really don't feel good about it. So Melvin Gordon, like there's things to point out how bad 180 yards last week, how bad the Jags have been at points this year. They just lose Miles Jack to the IR linebacker. So another guy gone. It's a spot where Melvin Gordon, 3 out of the last 4 weeks, has 20 plus touches on the ground, which is great. Controls this backfield still over Eckler. The only issue is they have still a terrible offensive versus defensive line run blocking advantage, even against a bad defensive line in Jacksonville, because that's just how bad this Chargers offensive line is. Like Gordon hasn't been good since returning, and Eckler doesn't have insane games on the ground. And a lot of that is not due to their skill sets, as opposed to just this offensive line is brutal. They got Russell Okung back in the past couple of weeks, so that's definitely going to help them. But it's still a spot where they're getting hit at the line of scrimmage or behind it, the second most in the league, these running backs and the Chargers. And that just doesn't lead for a lot of upside, especially out of a guy in Gordon who hasn't showed that much burst since being back. That all said, he's 6,400 on a slate where there's just really not a lot of value, and I have him projected for 19 total touches. So yeah, at 6,400, he's probably a secondary option right now for me, but he's the top of that secondary list.
Yeah, all right. I'm right there with you. Definitely going to be playing him a little bit for sure. And maybe getting to this Chargers passing attack is possibly a contrarian stack, but we'll get to that a little bit later. This range is kind of a dead range to me outside of that. Marlon Mack is a tough matchup against the number 1 DVOA defense, or number 2 or something, Tampa Bay. That's a really tough one. Anyone else? I'll throw some names at you, and you tell me if anyone stands out to you. Josh Jacobs questionable against Tennessee. Tennessee hasn't been great against opposing backs this year. Joe Mixon, Devin Singletary. That's it. Anybody in this range you like? Aaron Jones as well.
Yeah, so at the top of it, Aaron Jones stands out as a GPP option. He's been pretty bad as of late. He's relying a lot on touchdowns this season so far. So 13-point favorite. Washington's 16th against the run, according to PFF. It's just a spot where he's a guy all season long who's been either boom or bust for you. 18 rushing yards last week was terrible. Seeing 6 targets was nice after they talked him up in terms of getting him LaFleur back into the receiving game for Aaron Jones. So I do like him at 6,700 as just a GPP only option. And then Joe Mixon, just based on the volume he's seeing, the issue for Joe Mixon is he's just not running routes. He's only ran 4 more routes than Giovanni Bernard over the past month, which isn't great for a guy who should be close to a 10-point underdog in this game. So he's still in play just due to the slate here. He'll still see 16 touches or more, all the goal line work. But I would say Melvin Gordon and then Aaron Jones in that 6K range are the ones that stand out the most.
All right. I am right there with you. Let's get to this final range here. Few interesting names to talk about. First off, Sonny Michel or James White?
I'll go with Sonny Michel this week.
Oh,
yeah.
What makes you say that?
So I guess disclaimer is I really don't want either of these guys, but James White comes in right now at the highest price he's been all season long. He excels more, as he should, as a pass catching running back in games where they're trailing, which they can in this one. Although being at home as a small favorite, not portraying that as much to happen here. I think what I have projected right now is James White for a total of 10 touches and Sonny Michel for 16, all of them on the ground. So it's just a spot where I think he sees more usage on the ground. 32nd ranked Chiefs defense. The issue with Michel, though, he's the most he's been since week 3. Since then, when Rex Burkhead is playing, he hasn't had a game over 10 fantasy points, hasn't had a game really doing anything. So Burkhead is definitely taking away any of those routes that Michel saw spike. He ran career high routes back-to-back weeks when Burkhead was out in the middle of the season. Those are all gone. So it's everything just on the ground now for a terrible, just mess of a backfield. So in terms of matchup, I think he has the better one on the ground if he actually sees work. But I'm not thrilled with it. But if I had to pick a Patriots running back, I actually mentioned this, I think, the other day, I would probably take Michel there.
Fair enough. I think I'm on the James White train because I'm kind of digging the Kansas City side of this one. Certainly, I think both are viable. And if you think that New England is going to be trailing or this is going to be a pass-happy game, I think James White's pretty decent price in full PPR. Let's get to the next big name in this range, Devonta Freeman. Any love there for the probably incorrectly priced. Like he's probably about, I don't know, $500 too cheap around the industry. But does he have the upside for GPPs?
Yeah, I think he does. And I see he's picking up ownership right now. Nothing crazy, just because it's spread out in general. He's the guy who stands out the most, I'm sure, for a good amount of people, especially myself at 5,400 against the Panthers. There's just a lot of holes that you could poke in even a guy like him, but the ownership's not high enough that I want to poke them all that much. He's fine. The things that I would say are, yeah, right now the Panthers 19 touchdowns. It skews the DVOA a little bit, but giving up just a ton of points on the ground, one of the worst, if not the worst, DVOA defense. 6 touchdowns more than anybody else. So there is something to that. But the problem with Devonta Freeman is not even so much his skill set, although the injuries do not help his cause, but this run blocking advantage for Atlanta has just been terrible all season due to injuries. Well, they picked up guys in the draft because of these injuries, spent first round picks, 2 of them. Those guys end up getting hurt. So now you have a guy averaging 12 and a half carries a game because they just don't run a lot. And also he does average a decent 25 routes run per game. But what you're getting there is a guy with low end on the ground upside, and then you're paying 5,400 for most of the work to come in the receiving game, where the Panthers are surprisingly good, top 5 in receptions in terms of bottom 5 allowed, and then only giving up the 5th fewest receiving yards to running backs in the air. So yeah, it's a spot where he stands out. But again, like if he ended up getting too chalky, there's a lot of holes to poke in this guy. He's been around this price range all season long, and it seems like he is indeed underpriced, especially for this matchup. But this is just an atrocious offensive line when it comes to defending or pass blocking for the run.
All right. Good to know. I kind of agree. I don't think he's like quite locked territory or anything, but I do think he's one of the better values on the slate. So I'm kind of there with you. Let's move it on. I just want to talk about a couple more players in this range. One guy I like a lot that I think is going to go overlooked because of their defense is LaShawn McCoy. What do you think at that price point? Seems like a little bit cheap to me.
Yeah, so it's extremely cheap. And so the news that we got was Darrell Williams is on IR, or Darrell Williams is on IR. And then you have the news yesterday, I believe, that Damian Williams is also not going to suit up for this one. So if we were going to get just LaShawn McCoy and Darwin Thompson in this one, I would have liked it a lot more. But I believe earlier this week, and I'm pulling up just the transaction sheet right now. Yeah, so the Chiefs signed Spencer Ware earlier this week. And that's so that's a big issue. They signed him on December 3rd. And the main reason why it's an issue is he knows this playbook and this offense better than LaShawn McCoy, better than Darwin Thompson, both guys who were there for 1 year. So Spencer Ware is not even in these player pools. I probably wouldn't want him anyways, but I'm not shocked if there's a bet out there. It's probably plus money, but I'm not shocked to see Spencer Ware lead this team in touches.
And that's bold.
Yeah, I think either way, what you're going to get here is a 3-headed backfield where McCoy's cheap and you can surely play him, but I think the upside there is probably 10 to 12 touches, whereas I think the upside for Spencer Ware is 10 to 12 touches as well.
You know, that's a great point. And like when you look at LaShawn McCoy's game log, like he's had one since week 5, he's had 1 week with more than 12 carries in a game. And like he is getting targeted a little bit, but like, you know, like he's a safe play, I think, in cash games. Maybe like you're probably looking at 10 to 12 points, but I don't know if he has the upside. Tough matchup. Maybe a split work. Darwin Thompson got a lot of the carries last week, but they were up like big time on the Raiders. So who knows? You know, Alex and I were talking about this yesterday. Like, is this just a load management thing though for McCoy? Like Reed said as much a couple weeks ago that they were just like trying to prep him and get him ready for the stretch run here. Is that what's going on, or is it just that they don't really like he's kind of washed?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a big piece of it. Like they healthy scratched him with the reason being to just keep his body fresh for the playoffs. So I think that's definitely a big part of it too. But like while they're in these games, there's been 2 games where he's fumbled the ball and sort of been benched in them. So I think it's also just a trust thing with Andy Reid. Even though he had him back in Philadelphia, I think he just doesn't trust him as much as probably Damian Williams. But this would be the week to really judge that. There's no Damian Williams. You're out there with a rookie in Thompson and a guy who's been in the system in Spencer Ware. Who do you give the ball more to? And I really do think that Spencer Ware might just come in and see 6 to 8 touches. He could lead the team, like I said, but I think it's going to be enough to really keep McCoy from ever seeing like a 16-touch game.
All right. Makes sense to me. Give me anyone else down here that you like, Sal? Any sleepers that people should be aware of? Any low owned? Or you team Patrick Laird? Somebody else that I haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, so I don't think I'm team Patrick Laird. I mean, the slate makes him at least worth mentioning. I actually like the pass catching role that he has. They signed Zach Zenner. DeLance Thomas, there's a really good chance he will be active for this game. So if they end up having 4 running backs active, I'll just have no interest there against a really good Jets run defense. A couple of names just to point out. We'll see as tomorrow shows up. But yeah, Josh Jacobs didn't do much on practice Friday. They said that was like the quote, nothing all week. And he has like a broken shoulder or something he's been playing with, or fractured shoulder. So if he doesn't go, DeAndre Washington's $3,000 flat and would probably see like 12 to 15 touches. So that's most likely in a tough matchup against Tennessee, but most likely one of the best values on the slate at that point. And then Bilal Powell's 3,500 if Le'Veon Bell's illness keeps him out, as they're hinting right now. There's a serious chance that could happen. You still have Ty Montgomery back there, but those are some of the flyer running backs that I think Washington would be the guy I would have the most interest in at 3K flat.
Who did you say for the Jets there?
So Bilal Powell, I think, would step in. He's been getting the backup duty, but the issue there is Ty Montgomery's still there. I think you'd probably see 12 touches or so for a guy like
Powell. Like I'm thinking like Bilal Powell maybe goes like first, like Montgomery's more like third down back, or what do you think?
So I think that's definitely a way that it happens, but I'm almost tempted to lean that Bilal Powell is just a Le'Veon Bell role. And Ty Montgomery remains in doing what Bilal Powell would do, because they've been obviously Le'Veon Bell's a different type of running back, but they've been very fixated into these specific roles really since the preseason for each of these running backs. So you might just see kind of a shift in the role, but not as much as the overall volume. But then the same argument can be made the other way. I lean that it'll just be Bilal Powell seeing like 12 and a half, 13 touches as a projection, and Montgomery like 6 to 8.
Okay. That's good to know, because I feel like it's probably worth taking the risk on Powell, especially because he can probably perform a reasonable facsimile to that Le'Veon Bell role, and we've seen it in the past as well. Let's move it on to quarterbacks here. Top range: Lamar Jackson, Pat Mahomes. Any interest?
Yeah, I'm more interested this week in Lamar Jackson just overall. When it comes to stacking more in Mahomes, so Lamar Jackson, I'll probably just have like naked shares of. I really don't want anything in stacking with him. It's just a really tough matchup for Hollywood Brown against Tre'Davious White. Not anything I would really want any pieces of. Mark Andrews, if I was to force to throw some just correlating stacks in there, I'd go to him, but it's a loaded tight end position, and he seems like one of the ones that is actually priced up this week. So I'm fine at 7,400 continuing to get to Lamar. The rushing upside is without a doubt there, and he's just a guy that you can play every single week in any format. I like him more overall than Mahomes. Mahomes, I'll just take shots on at like an 8 to 10% clip in stacks against this really good secondary. McCourty is questionable still for the Patriots, so that's some big news, the cornerback there. And it's just a spot where you're betting on two really good coaches, Andy Reid's offense, overall this defense, and Bill Belichick. It should be a spot that I think they have success with. Mahomes as your quarterback. He probably goes, and right now he's going extremely low owned, so that's another reason why it urges me to get to more of him.
I'm just looking at the ownership here. So we have, where is Mahomes?
He was like 3% when I saw him like Wednesday or something.
And sign me up for that. I'll tell you what, I'm going to be overweight on Pat Mahomes this week for sure. If he's going to be 4% owned, that's crazy to me. We see really spread out ownership for these quarterbacks, as I mentioned at the top of the show. So you can really go any way you want to, but don't be afraid of Mahomes against this defense. This defense has been torched by two pretty good offenses in the past few weeks here as well. So I don't know. I'm of the opinion that they've been buoyed by playing really bad teams so far this season. I think that's not a controversial opinion, but we'll see, man. We'll see, because I think Mahomes can carve up any defense though. Next range down here: Rodgers, Cousins, Ryan, Deshaun Watson, our highest projected owned quarterback of the slate. In terms of our values and grades, looks like Rodgers, Ryan, and Watson in the opposite order. Those are the guys that our projections like a lot. What are you doing in this mid-range here?
Yeah, I think this is where the guys I like the most for just stacking or overall are. Right now, Matt Ryan and Deshaun Watson are two of my favorite guys to be rostering. Probably Matt Ryan the most. Just against Carolina, it's fine even if you do have James Bradbury out there against Julio. I'm not worried about that. The rest of the matchups with Austin Hooper practicing in full all week, a second straight week of having Devonta Freeman healthy, it's just a good spot for this offense that is finally fully healthy. So I'll get to Matt Ryan at 6,600. The game environment is one of the few that actually sets up nice for both teams having a decent total on this big slate. So Matt Ryan's the guy I look to the most early on right now for stacking. Deshaun Watson, it's a tough matchup against his secondary, but I think going a little bit unnoticed is, Chris Harris Jr. will be on Hopkins. That's really never stopped Hopkins in the past, whether it's Jordan not Jordan, Jalen Ramsey against him. Doesn't really matter, but you now have the biggest question for me is what happens with Will Fuller. Doesn't really change my interest in Watson too much, but Will Fuller's a guy that I had a lot of interest in so far this season. So seeing that Will Fuller is 5,500 dealing with a hamstring injury, that's never great. But if you did have a guy come out here and end up playing and be healthy, it's a good matchup against what is a safety, a converted safety going into being a cornerback for the third straight week. And so far this season, this guy now in Harris, who's going to be on Will Fuller if he plays, or stills if Fuller's out, has given up 3 touchdowns in 3 weeks, over 200 yards, and is the third worst passer rating against over that time. So it's a good individual matchup there, which boosts up Deshaun Watson for me. The mobile upside is also great. He's just a guy that he's similar to Lamar, except probably just a better overall passer. Is he just every single.
Sal, just let me interrupt you for a second. My computer's about to die because I'm an idiot and I didn't plug it in. Why don't you keep talking about this range, and if I'm not back in time, maybe just give us a little preview of the next range here.
Yeah, definitely. I'll keep going through it.
All right.
So for me personally, just Matt Ryan stands out as a guy that I like a lot in this range right now. Probably my top interest at quarterback when it comes to stacking. That is. And even cash games, he seems really nice. And then Deshaun Watson is somebody just went through, touched on. The issue with me for Aaron Rodgers is he's great. Like the price point is up in a matchup where Quentin Dunbar is the only really good defensive player for the Redskins. He'll be on Devontae Adams. So a tougher matchup for Adams, but nothing he can't win. You're now just paying a lot for Packer stacks, right? Rodgers is priced up there. You have Devontae Adams all the way up to 8K, not 7K. I think he's fine on an individual basis, but just paying that much for a stack here as 13-point favorites probably doesn't correlate the best for tournament winning scores. Rodgers this season, 30 pass attempts in games, has 1 GPPs. But this seems like the one where they just go very heavy on the ground. And the price point is the big piece that makes the puzzle a little bit harder to fit together. So I'm not as interested in Adams or Rodgers in stacking, probably more so on getting him into some cash lineups. And then closing out this range, Baker Mayfield is somebody that I had a lot of interest in earlier in the week. Looking into some of the matchups, I still have interest. Just took it down a little bit, had too much exposure there. But Baker Mayfield in a spot where he currently is at 6,300. Nice matchup for Odell, who is now cheaper. I think my head's all over the place, but we'll work through this. I think he is just cheaper right now, and you get a very nice matchup for this overall team against Cincinnati, who you're going to get Odell Beckham having an outside cornerback or a slot cornerback moving to the outside, BW Webb against him. That's a really nice spot for Odell, no matter how bad it's been bad. And then you have Jarvis Landry, who is remaining in the slot, even though I thought Kareem Hunt would take some from him. He is back in the slot the last 2 weeks, and that should still be just as good. So I think that those two are going to be completely fine, which makes me get to the stack. And Njoku is back too. Probably not a spot where I want to get to him as much, but he's a cheap tight end if you want to throw it in. So that mid-range, I probably rank it for me right now. In terms of how much I get to them, Matt Ryan, Deshaun Watson, actually probably go Baker over Aaron Rodgers just for tournament reasons. Kirk Cousins is a huge favorite there. I don't think there's going to be enough pass attempts to go around, and I don't want to guess the tight end who catches the touchdown for Minnesota in the stack.
All right, makes sense. We have reversed sides on this screen here, so I don't know what happened there, but we're going to just keep going. And you are Sal Vetri. I'm Nolan Kelly. If you are watching this video, please feel free to give us a like. We greatly appreciate it. Helps us keep these shows free. Helps us keep coming at you 6 days a week with this NFL strategy show, and really 7 days a week because we've got 3 shows for you every Sunday morning. Did you cover all the quarterbacks there? I kind of spaced out for a minute. Did you cover all the kind of cheap ones as well?
No, I pretty much just got through like the 6K range at most of those quarterbacks, gave a brief ranking, but didn't touch on the 5K or below, which doesn't seem like there's much down there, but definitely should touch on it a little bit.
All right. Well, give me a flyer here.
Yeah, so I think $5,600 Phillip Rivers is somebody I have a good amount of interest in. So against the Chargers, against the Jacksonville Jaguars, the Chargers are going to have, in my opinion, a better matchup than they've had all season long in terms of just a pass blocking advantage. It's still bad, but it will be better here. And they're just fully healthy. Keenan Allen now a month removed from this injury. He's going to stay in the slot against DJ Hayden, Herndon, which is a nice difference from AJ Boye on the outside. Hunter Henry's priced down to 5,100. Just really easy to get to this stack. Phillip Rivers, as long as they keep him upright at 23.25 team implied total, I'm fine getting to a Rivers, Henry, and Keenan Allen stack. I like all those guys individually, so I might as well stack them up. And then pulling it back with the Jacksonville side, you do have viable options in either Leonard Fournette or any of those receivers. All 3 of them are in play for me. So, I think that he's the flyer at 5,600. He's the only thing below 6K at a quarterback that in tournaments I have confidence in. Other guys that have upside maybe for cash, Gardner Minshew due to his legs, Derek Carr because he's just too cheap. But for winning me a tournament, I don't have much confidence in those guys.
The other thing I like about Rivers is the price of his wide receivers.
Yeah, exactly. Like you have a guy in Keenan Allen who has 30+ point upside, and realistically, like he's not going to usually fall flat on his face below 15 any week, and he's in the 6K range. So I like that. And then Hunter Henry is just priced down after one bad week and probably priced too far down.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, the other thing to like about this game is if you are stacking it up, I feel like DJ Chark's probably a little bit better. We can talk about that when we get to wide receivers, but DJ Chark's probably a little bit better with Giamatti Minshew in there as well, or certainly had his best games with him in there. So you've got a more obvious bring back scenario if you're stacking up the Chargers.
Yeah, exactly. I think there's just really good options on both sides of this one when it comes to just fantasy production.
All right, let's move it on over to the wide receivers. Top range, Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill. Let's throw Devonta Adams in there.
Yep.
What are you doing with these three?
Yeah, so it's really not a spot that I prioritize any of these guys all that much individually, like finding high exposures to them. The thing that I'm going to just see is wherever I have Mahomes, I'm just probably going to get Tyreek Hill in every single one of those Mahomes lineups, and that's where a lot of my Tyreek Hill exposure will come from. There might be somewhere I don't have that, but over what we've seen over the last like 4 years, really is the Patriots just absolutely take away Travis Kelce. I mean, on average, he has about 35 receiving yards per game in 5 matchups against the Patriots. He catches about 3 balls per game. They just shut him down. He has 2 touchdowns, but in games where he had 40 yards and 23 yards. So it's a spot where Kelsey's price is coming down. He's still fine. Like, it's a small sample of 5 games, but it's pretty evident that they know they can't stop Tyreek Hill. Really, nobody can based on the way that this guy plays. So if I'm going to have Chiefs stacks, Tyreek Hill at 8,100, the main way I get to him is in those stacks, and I'd probably just end up putting him in most of my Chiefs stacks, pair it with Sammy Watkins or Kelsey if you could afford it. Michael Thomas, not a priority for me. Price point comes down. He won't see any Richard Sherman because Sherman stays on one side of the field. So that's nice there. And he should still have a Michael Thomas game, like 20, 24 points. I'm not shocked. Anything more, he's just a secondary interest. This top end range, I kind of hinted at it earlier. I like the top end running backs more just because there's really no options at the low end there that you can have faith in for upside. So I'm getting to a lot of cheaper 6-5K wide receivers. The guy that I would get to the most in the really like $7,500 or above range would be Julio, and then probably Devonta Adams after that.
All right, makes sense to me. Michael Thomas coming out as probably the highest owned receiver on this slate, which is, I don't know, a little bit surprising given that he's going up against the 49ers and is the most expensive receiver. I guess you get a little bit of a price discount from past weeks, but man, it's a tough matchup.
Yeah, definitely a tough matchup. It's rare that you see a home team or home Saints team only having like a 23 implied total. So defensive line is scary. He'll go up against Witherspoon, which Witherspoon hasn't been in there all that much this year due to injury, but he's top 10 in pass rating against. The secondary is just scary. The routes that Michael Thomas runs, though, it's really hard to take those like 5 to 10 yard slant and curl routes away from him. So he'll still get his, like an 8-yard or an 8 reception, 80-yard day here is very much on the table. He finds his way into the end zone. You're still looking at a 20-plus point game. So he's just more of a secondary interest at that price point. And it's not really because of him or even the wide receiver position as a whole. It's just running backs. I like the top end more, and it's really tough to find value running backs that you like this week.
All right, let's get into the next range. Stephon Diggs, $7,600. Adam Thielen, doubtful. He has not really, the production hasn't really been there with Thielen out. So I'm a little bit worried about it. He did have one good game against Denver, but other than that, just kind of goose eggs. Hopkins, Godwin, Evans, Edelman, DJ Moore. Who are you liking in this range?
Yeah, so in this range, I think the guy that I like the most, so a couple of guys, 7K range. The guy I like the most is probably Edelman here. Interesting matchup that I'll have in this game. It'll be a good amount of Fuller in the slot, and that's been the primary slot cornerback. But the last month, you've seen the Chiefs use more Tyrann Mathieu in coverage in the slot. So his safety converted now into a slot cornerback, and he's done well. He actually has the most slot coverage snaps in the team this year. Some of that is because Fuller was hurt, but it's a good matchup for Edelman, who will remain in the slot against the guy who's not used to playing that role of the slot cornerback, even as good and talented as Mathieu is. So I like Edelman the most in this range. And then going up to Julio Jones, I think it's fine if you end up with him. I probably just get there in stacks. He's not the type of guy that I'm going to one-off this week, but he's very low owned. So I'm going to just go out of my way to find him in more stacks. But Ryan right now is the guy I like the most at quarterback. So I imagine I'll have a good amount of him. These Tampa Bay receivers are just kind of falling by the wayside for me, but I prefer Godwin more. The Colts have a really strong secondary. Desire is their outside cornerback that if they played man coverage, Mike Evans should have one of the best games of his career against that guy, but they know that, the Colts. So they end up using their talent that is not the greatest one-on-one in a man as just a better. They get to them to improve a lot more when they work as a team in a zone coverage. So Godwin in the middle of the field, usually that's where zone coverage will leak points and receptions to. He'd be the guy I get to there, but I would rank this range for me as Edelman, Julio, Godwin, and then Hopkins, and probably get to Evans the least.
Can you talk to me just a little bit, or about, and to our viewers a little bit about this this Colts defense? Like, are they, because they're notoriously, they play the highest zone in the entire league, or the highest zone rates, at least last time I checked. What does that do? They kind of open, because I've noticed they've been really bad against tight ends and they've been really bad against pass catching backs over the past year plus. Is that just because those positions are able to find holes in the zones more easily? Why does that give an upgrade to tight ends and running backs, or does it?
Yeah, so like the whole thing with a zone defense is you usually play it when you don't have talent or as much to win man to man, and the Bills are doing it a ton too. They're two of the top heaviest zone teams, but they have good talent in Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, so they're just getting the best of both worlds there. But with the Colts, the whole goal of like a zone defense is to keep you in front of them, just keep the offense in front of you, and the best way to do that is just to play, if it was man coverage, just not as much press coverage, so you play a little bit off. And at that point, just the best matchups are going to be quick passes out to running backs and to guys in the slots, as opposed to on the outside where a lot of guys are usually running a little bit further down the field. So you just have more open reads when guys are coming out of the slot or in the backfield, because these zone coverages are saying, okay, we'll let you catch the ball for 3 yards, see what you can do after that.
Right. Makes sense to me. Let's get into the next range. I kind of like that Julio call, by the way. I feel like he's not going owned, and Julio, $7,500, pretty decent price. Getting him in a dome, doesn't carry an injury designation, so I'm going to be overweight. I think I'm a little bit worried about, I don't know. I have not been able to figure out this Atlanta offense so far this year. I don't know who's going to, it just looks like you're better off just stacking Hooper, but Hooper's also doesn't carry an injury designation right now. It looks like he practiced in full all week. So yeah, it's kind of tough. Like, they can spread this ball around, I guess. And I'm guessing that if you are looking at our rankings right now, they are going to change by tomorrow because, and our projections, because of Hooper being back. And I'm guessing Ridley will drop down a little bit. This next range is kind of mid-tier range. We got Keenan Allen. We've got Calvin Ridley, Courtland Sutton, and Odell Beckham Jr. as standouts to me. Anyone you like here?
Yeah, so I think Calvin Ridley at 6,700. He's $1,200 more than when he torched Dante Jackson in this Carolina secondary about 3 weeks ago. But I think he still grades out as a nice play. If you weren't going to get to Julio in Atlanta stacks, Hooper and Ridley offer just a nice spot where you're not spending a ton on your stack, but still have a lot of upside. So Ridley stands out first there. Doesn't seem like Adam Thielen's going to play. Hasn't practiced all week. Would have had a beautiful matchup here at a good price point, but I doubt he ends up playing. No practice again for like the fourth straight week. But then it just drops off to guys that have secondary interest in. Keenan Allen, I'll get to in a lot of Chargers stack, but just a secondary interest. Jarvis Landry we'll get to in those Cleveland stacks. Interest in Baker Mayfield for sure this week, but just a secondary interest. And then going down to Odell, I'd prefer Odell just for the upside over Landry. You haven't seen it in a couple weeks now, but he'll get to go up against, mentioned a little bit earlier, B.W. Webb, who is notoriously been a bad outside cornerback who the Bengals moved into the slot and he had some success. And now due to injuries, they've had to move him back out to the outside. In a week or two, he's been okay, but it's still a spot that Odell can take advantage of. So I'd probably prioritize this range as Ridley, then Odell, Keenan Allen, and Jarvis Landry.
So you're not worried at all about Ridley having target siphon, because he's been good, but only because Hooper's been out and Jones has been injured, right? Why are we paying up for Ridley when he's done nothing all year, except when Julio and Hooper are out?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for Ridley is I think the person who sees the biggest hit for Hooper coming back, aside from just direct tight ends, is going to be Gage in the slot. Hooper is running just all of his routes middle of the field as a tight end, doesn't go out wide as much, or even in the slot as opposed to off the line. So Ridley is similar to what you saw the last time when Julio was in. Bradbury will just take a lot of man onto Julio, and then you'll get one-on-one matchups for Ridley on the outside. So yeah, the price point's up $1,200, doesn't make it as appealing, but I'll still be getting there in stacks. It's an elevated price tag, but the way that they should scheme out, Hooper in the middle of the field will take looks away from him, but it's not anything that is something, if I hadn't projected for maybe 8 targets, it would drop down to like 7 instead of fall off the face to like 5. So I think my priorities for stacking this team are probably going to come in as Hooper, Ridley, and then Julio, but those are also close. They'll be in the groups and I'll have a lot of all of them.
All right, makes sense to me. Punt plays, anyone you like below in the lower price range, who is standing out to you? Are we going back to 40 or to super cheap Sammy Watkins, 4,600 on DraftKings, a little bit less on FanDuel? I think he's $14 on Yahoo.
Man, yeah. So I have secondary interest. I haven't marked here as secondary interest. He just doesn't have as much big play upside because since really week 1, they just put him into the slot. And since then, he hasn't had anything more than like a 5-6 catch game for 60 yards. He has the best individual matchup on the Chiefs. He'll get Jonathan Jones in the slot, who is the worst cornerback for the Patriots, but he's not a bad cornerback. It's just the best of the worst, or the worst of the best, I guess you can say. So not a spot that I really prioritize Watkins outside of those stacks. Guys who are just going low owned that are a little bit interesting. This is why I like this 5 and 6K range. Talked about some of the 6K guys, but 5K range, Tyler Boyd, 5,900, not getting much. John Ross coming back, I argue, helps Tyler Boyd. It'll keep him in the slot more. Alex Erickson was taking a lot of slot snaps, and Boyd was having to go to the outside the last couple of weeks. But if John Ross does suit up, you'll just get Ross and Tate on the outside, and Boyd might play 70, 80% of his snaps in the slot instead of 50%, which in my opinion would help him. Zach Pascal against Tampa. And then if this hamstring injury did not spike back up for Will Fuller, I would love him this week against a converted safety he'll get to face who's given up 3 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. But the hamstring has me a little bit worried. I still like him at 5,500. But those are the main guys down here that I like. One final guy in this range, $5,300, Jamison Crowder. According to Pro Football Focus.
Yeah. Love it.
According to Pro Football Focus, he has the best matchup on the entire week against Jamal Wiltz. Yeah, Jamal Wiltz has been bad in the slot all year, even worse than just overall coverage. But you get a spot for Crowder where his price point's finally decreasing because he hasn't caught touchdowns for 6 straight weeks like he was on pace to, according to a lot of people. But he caught them for 3 straight weeks. He's still the priority in this offense. If you get no Le'Veon Bell, you could argue that helps him even more for just shorter passes out of the slot. I actually like Crowder. He makes for a really good cash play and even tournament upside at that price point.
I think he's a great cash play, right? Like, cause he doesn't really have huge upside though. Like, you catch a touchdown and catch 6 balls and you're fine and you'll pay off your price. 5,300, I feel like is a more than reasonable. I was kind of hoping he'd totally fly under the radar this week. And he is looking at about 10% ownership on DraftKings and similar on FanDuel, Yahoo, and FantasyDraft. Like, not a little bit less on Yahoo, I think, but for the most part, like that's a pretty steep ownership price to pay for a guy who's not that great. So I don't know what to do with him. I mean, he does have 3 games in the last 5 weeks or so where he's been solid, and I think he's a good play and it's a great matchup. But 10% ownership, maybe a little steep.
Yeah, maybe a little steep, just relative to the bigger slate. I still think it's fine for me at that point. Yeah, I feel good coming in around there. The matchup is just really good. I don't really want it in many stacks, but it would just be a one-off spot. And then, echoing that in cash, he stands out as a really nice play. Not much else down here. I mean, you do have Tyrell Williams cheap in a nice matchup against Tennessee if you wanted to go there. The really cheap wide receivers, not much. Corey Davis is 3,900. He stands out, but for not that much interest. Chris Conley at 4K, Auden Tate at 4K, other guys that should see 6, 7 targets in their respective games and have some sort of upside because of that volume at a cheap price point. But at that point, it seems like we're just fishing down here because there's not a lot of secure value.
Yeah, makes sense. I will say that Osimo, I'm with you on Crowder. Osimo's rankings projections don't really agree, and thinks there are better options in that range or better options down a little bit below, including Sammy Watkins, Alan Lazard, who else in this range? Tyler Boyd as well. So, I mean, it's a tough call, but I feel like I'm maybe going to come in a little underweight. Any final thoughts on wide receivers? Anything I missed or you missed that you wanted to talk about?
That's really it. The one thing I will say, and this is, it's gross to even want to say it, but it's Terry McLaurin at 5,100. Dwayne Haskins has been, I've been on record saying outside of Luke Falk and Ryan Finley, he's just been atrocious. He's overthrown at least 2 times pretty blatantly Terry McLaurin on touchdowns, arguably 3 times. So the upside is just going out the window. Kevin King for the Packers is questionable. He's given up the most receiving yards in the league if he does play. Regardless, it's a good matchup for McLaurin. 13-point underdogs. Might be the first week we see Dwayne Haskins having to throw 35 times. If we're lucky, they might pull him before then because things are going really bad. And you get some upside out of Case Keenum or actually Colt McCoy. So Terry McLaurin at 5,100 is the type of guy at 1% that no matter how bad this quarterback has been, I'll still take chances because he won't face Jair Alexander and it'll be a very good matchup for him. But that said, he's 1% on. You can get 5 lineups of him if you're playing a ton, and that's all you need.
I like that call a lot. I've watched some of those throws and I've got him in season long. Just killing me. Actually, one guy I did want to touch on, and correct me if you've already talked about him, Mike Williams.
No, I have not. Yeah, you can go shoot.
Seems too cheap. Touchdown regression, 200-yard games, getting decent targets. Is this a spot for him?
So yeah, I like a lot of pieces of this Chargers. I'll definitely have him in groups there. My only concern is that matchup against AJ Boye, who has still been solid this year. But it's not one that's going to get me 100% off of Williams. Again, you're banking on some of those bigger plays that he has over the second half of the year, had a little bit more, maybe 1 per game or so, as opposed to the first half. Some drop touchdowns to start the year definitely doesn't help his case, but I would probably rank that side of the ball when it comes to the groupings of it. Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, and then Williams. So yeah, I'll definitely get to some Williams, just not as much of a priority in those stacks.
All right, makes sense to me. Before we get on to tight ends here, I just want to mention as well, we have on the contrary coming up at 11 o'clock Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern time. Rick 75, Brian Hooper, is going to be joining Osmo and Chris Spags. He's one of the best DFS players in the world. He's been posting some videos in our Slack chat that have been really helpful about ownership. Super good guy, and he'll have a lot of insight on this slate. So make sure you check that out. I think it's going to be a great watch. As well, if you wouldn't mind hitting that like button if you're watching, we greatly appreciate it. It helps us keep these free. So thank you so much for watching and tuning in. Let's finally get into tight ends in our final 5 to 10 minutes here. Top range, we got Kelsey, Hooper, Kittle, Waller, Mark Andrews, and then it kind of drops off a little bit. Hunter Henry. What are you doing with this top range?
Yeah, so early in the week, I was just all over the price point of Kelsey coming down $1,000, but it's definitely priced for the matchup here. Again, earlier mentioned that Kelsey averages just about 35 yards a game, hasn't had a game over, I believe, 51 receiving yards against the Patriots in 5 career games, 2 in the playoffs. So it definitely seems like he's the guy Bill Belichick tries to take away. You really can't take away Tyreek Hill. So just by default, he's the next weapon to take away in the middle of the field. So Kelsey at 6,200, it's still a cheap enough price point to where he can still do a lot of good at that price point, and it's really hard for him to hurt you. But the priorities for me probably come in the range of, and maybe in this order, George Kittle, Hunter Henry, and Austin Hooper. Hooper practicing all week in full definitely gives me more upside there and belief in him. Kittle's the cheapest he's been in 7 weeks, and just even in this matchup, should never be that cheap at 5,900. I've only seen 20 passes each of the last 2 weeks for Jimmy G. If you just get that somewhere around 28, you're going to have a 7 or 8 target day for Kittle, and that's a really nice just volume number at 5,900. Hunter Henry at 51. It's just really a price play. Bad week last week. Price point comes down. I'm fine to look past that into the previous weeks before that, where he was seeing a consistent 7 to 8 targets. So that's where I probably go in the top range. We'll definitely have interest. It's going to be a tight player pool for me of 6 or 7 of these guys all coming in around 15, 20% owned, because it's all the great tight ends and none of them are really too expensive.
None too expensive, not too many great matchups. My sneak play is going to be Kittle. New Orleans has kind of been torched through the middle of the field. They've given up. They've been just giving up some of the most yards in the entire league to guys running routes down the center. So kind of like Kittle there. Darren Waller is our projections, and on most sites is our favorite play on most projection sites. So all right, let's talk punt tight ends here and sort of this mid range as well. I'll group it into one. We got Jack Doyle is going to be popular, super cheap, going up against Indianapolis or going up against Tampa. Pretty much the focal point of this offense now. Please tell me as well that I do not have to play Vance McDonald this week.
Yeah, I mean, the guy is just absolutely, in all accounts, the DUE were due for some sort of decent game. And it's only, I don't want him, but it's only right that it'll happen against the flow chart of the Cardinals. But no, he's already priced up for it. He's averaging 16 receiving yards per game over the last month. Now he has Duck Hodges, who in a game where the Steelers defense should control it, they should be able to get as much done as they want on the ground. These types of games are where they just want Hodges to throw the ball 20 to 25 times. You probably see 3-4 targets for Vance McDonald. Touchdown upside is all you want there, but at this price, or all you're really relying on there. But at this point, when he's 4,300, even if he has 4 catch, 50-yard day at 9 fantasy points, it's not doing much for you, and that would be exceeding what we expect out of him, at least in my opinion. So no interest there. Yeah, Jack Doyle picking up ownership still, but he's fine. 11 targets last week in a really good matchup. Should continue to be involved, not only on the line of scrimmage, but out in the slot as well, sometimes out wide around the red zone. So he's good usage on this team. And then I'll just say Mike Gesicki continues to be a nice weapon for Miami, somewhere that over the last month, best month of his career so far, his short career. And then also Ryan Fitzpatrick looking there more. My punt options are Jack Doyle 1, doesn't really shock anybody, but all the way down to 2,500. News came out yesterday that wasn't encouraging, but Ian Thomas, they said that Greg Olsen is going to miss with a concussion. The Panthers want to use all 3 of their tight ends to replace him, but I just think that's probably a very lazy report that probably came out in just a question out of the media. And he just said, we'll use all of our guys. But Ian Thomas ran 22 routes when Olsen went down last week. And then also, if you date back to last year, the final 5 games, he averaged over 10 fantasy points per week. He had 3 weeks there where he scored at least 12. He's a really good tight end. So a pass catching tight end nonetheless against Atlanta. So I don't think they're just going to go out there and use blocking tight ends all game. At 2,500, if that news didn't come out, he probably would have been the top 2 or 3 owned tight end for me. It gives me a little hesitation, but I might end up just doing it anyways. At 2,500, a lot has to go wrong, and I think he'll run 25 to 30 routes.
I'm right there with you. That's the best value on the slate, I think, at this position. I don't buy into that narrative that they're going to split time. I think we have the sample size of last week and all of last year to go on. Of course, we don't have Ron Rivera coaching the team anymore, but at the same time, he was a best ball sleeper, and a preseason sleeper for a lot of people because everyone figured Greg Olsen kind of washed. He was really good down the stretch. I think the talent is there, the opportunity is there, and the price point is right. So I'm definitely going to be overweight on Ian Thomas this week. Anyone we missed in the tight end range? Can we move it on to stacks?
Yeah, I think that's it. I'm good on tight ends.
All right, awesome. If you got any questions for Sal, please pop them in the chat right now. We'll try to get to a couple of them. Please hit the like button as well if you don't mind. Let's talk about some stacks here. Osmo has a top stacks tool on the site that's great for premium members. It basically tells you the ownership of the stack relative to how likely they are to be the top stack on the slate, which is super helpful for GPPs. So if you are not a premium member, make sure to check that out. I'm curious to see how that's going to end up and how that ownership ends up. I'll give you mine first, and you can critique. My favorite kind of like under the radar stack is maybe the Chargers with Williams, some sort of combination of two of the three of Allen, Williams, and Keenan Allen. Hunter Henry. My favorite low-owned, high-end stack is going to be Kansas City, and I don't really feel like there's a chalk stack on this slate, so I don't really have one. What about yourself?
Yeah, so I think just probably the most ownership for me will go to Atlanta against Carolina. It just seems like one of the 2 or 3 games that actually has a decent game environment where somebody in the game doesn't have like a 15 game total or team total as a lot of these teams do. So I like Atlanta a lot. And then after that, some of the sneakier stacks, I'll echo the Chargers there. They're just all too cheap for the talent that they all possess here in a fine matchup against Jacksonville, especially Keenan Allen's matchup is just great. And then I also like Cleveland this week against Cincinnati. Cincinnati defense that is just so banged up, moving safeties to cornerbacks, slot cornerbacks to the outside for cornerback, just trying to fill in as much as they can to close out the season. It's somehow worked for them for like 2 weeks, but it's not going to hold all that much. The offensive line, this offense has been terrible for the whole season really for Cleveland here, but we've seen them win Millie Makers. Should be a fast-paced environment, and I like the options for Odell and Landry. So that's sort of the under the radar, maybe lower owned stacks. And then the stack that probably comes in a little more popular that I would like is going to be Atlanta.
All right. I like it a lot. A couple questions in here. Mark Sitars says, Devontae Parker, good play?
Yeah, he's a good play. You're paying for it now at 6,900. Like he's still fine. I think he's right there next to DJ Moore, who's 7K. I'd rather have DJ Moore and then just a couple other guys below him like Keenan Allen. So I just don't get too much of him. But if you land on him, there's nothing bad I can say outside of he's just more expensive now.
I'll tell you where he's a good play. Yahoo, $20.
Yeah, that's the best price.
Good value. Next question we got. Hang on a second here. I don't know how to use the internet, apparently. Geis, Lindsey, James, or Washington from Joshua Romero?
Geis, Lindsey, James, or
James Washington, sorry.
Or James Washington. Okay. Is this just like season long? I guess I'll take it as DraftKings. I'll go give me, what was the second one he said?
Geis, Philip Lindsay, or James Washington?
I'll take Philip Lindsay there.
I'll take not that you care. Listen to Sal, don't listen to me. I'll take Darius Geis, but I feel like higher upside. Lindsay probably safer floor, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think that's it for questions. So we got one more from Murdoch. James Washington, Golden Tate, Dede Westbrook, who's questionable, or Eckler in season-long fantasy flex.
I will take. That's a really good one, actually. Since Eli Manning is starting, I would have taken Golden Tate if it was Daniel Jones on Monday night, but I'll end up taking Eckler there.
I'm also going to go with Austin Eckler. Feel like he's got sneaky upside and a safe floor. All right, that is going to do it for us. Sorry we were a little late today, technical difficulties, but we will be back next week with Chris Randone and yourself, and probably have our name tags ready to go and not the opposite. We have lots of cool stuff coming up on Osmo.com, so make sure to tune in, especially as I mentioned previously, Brian Hooper joining Osmo and Chris Baggs on the contrary to talk about this slate in just 2 hours. And of course, we have the Manchester Derby coming up, so make sure to go watch that right now. It starts in 20 minutes. You a soccer fan, Sal?
No, I am not. I am the stereotypical American who watches during the World Cup.
I like it. I also watch during the World Cup. A good EPL derby will get me every time. That's going to do it, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. Good luck this week with your DFS lineups, and we will see you shortly. If you do not mind, smash that like button on the way out.